Despite the abundance of the supplementary food that is given to the condors, food's put out about every 3 days and a number of carcasses on the cliff rim for them, condors are made to soar and travel and find carcasses. And the Arizona birds find a tremendous amount of food on their own. In 2002 and 2003, we documented 130 carcasses found by our condors. And this is probably a fraction of what they actually found because much of their foraging was done in areas that were inaccessible to us. In the fall, unfortunately, many of the carcasses that they're finding contain lead bullet fragments. During the fall hunting season of 2004, for example, 85% of the free-flying condors in Arizona showed lead exposure. In 2006, 90% of the Arizona condors showed lead exposure. So how do we cope with condors that have lead? Every condor in Arizona is trapped for lead testing and transmitter replacement at least once a year. And they're also trapped opportunistically, particularly if they're thought to have fed on a hunter-killed carcass. This is a bunch of condors loafing around a trap. We're hoping they'll go in. There's a baited carcass in there. They get pretty savvy and uneager to go in that trap. Biologists test each condor's blood for the presence of lead using a field tester. These are two biologists holding a condor, and somebody's about to draw blood from the condor's leg. All condors with lead poisoning are treated immediately. The treatment's called chelation therapy, and it involves injecting the birds with a substance called calcium EDTA. The calcium binds the lead and helps it pass out of the bird's system. And the bird gets an injection into its breast muscle twice a day for 5 days. So it's a very intensive treatment, a very stressful procedure for the condors. But if they're caught soon enough after they've ingested the lead, they have a good chance of surviving. During the fall hunting season of 2004, 18 condors were chelated and all were saved. In 2006, 70% of the condor population required chelation. Sadly, though, not all condors are caught in time. Because condors usually feed as a group, if a carcass is contaminated with lead, multiple birds are likely to get lead poisoning. And since the dominant older condors have the first access to food, they're the most likely to be killed by lead. 3 breeding age condors died of lead poisoning as a result of the 2006 hunting season, including our beloved 119. She was really one of the matriarchs of the Arizona program and probably Grand Canyon's best known, best loved condor. And I was really touched that the park made this little commemorated 119 that everyone who worked here loved so well, with a little tag number 19 on her. So I was incredibly touched. A friend came down to Grand Canyon and brought this back for me, and so of course I cried several more days over 119's loss. But this is a good time for me to reiterate that the issue of condors and lead poisoning is not a hunting issue, it's an ammunition issue. Hunting is incredibly beneficial to condors because it provides a tremendous food source for the birds. In the Condors range in California, an estimated 30,000 large animal carcasses and field-dressed visceral remains are left in the field annually. So that's an incredible food source for the condors. Unfortunately, though, many of those animals contain lead bullet fragments. So most wild condors die prematurely of lead poisoning. It's thought that condors can live up to 60 to 70 years. In the Southwest, we're lucky if our condors survive into their teens. This is going to end on a happy note, though. Despite these kind of setbacks, condor recovery has continued to advance, and the world's condor population continues to grow. There are now 332 condors in the world, and there used to only be 22, so this is a huge, huge improvement. 176 of those condors live in captivity still, 156 are free-flying, and 64 condors are currently flying in Arizona. That was as of the end of July 2008. Perhaps the most exciting development in the condor reintroduction effort during my tenure with the program was the first successful reproduction in the wild by reintroduced condors. We had to wait 6 to 7 years for our condors to grow up once we released them, so it was a long time in coming. We were pretty excited when they first started displaying to each other and showing breeding behavior. In the first few years that our condor population started breeding, we had eggs laid, but they didn't hatch, and that's fairly typical for inexperienced breeders. This photo depicts one of the first nestlings that our young birds selected. It was in a formation known as the Battleship here at the South Rim of Grand Canyon National Park. Here is the nest cave, And remember, this bird has about a 9-foot wingspan, so the cave entrance is enormous. That helps give you a little bit of perspective on how massive that Battleship area is and how big that nest cave is. Upon climbing into this nest to try to determine why one of the early nest attempts had failed, the Condor National Park biologist at the time, Chad Olson, who's also here tonight, and who's now my husband, found a number of large bones way at the back of this enormous condor cave. These are the pictures of those bones that he found deep in the back of that cave. Later analysis showed that these were Pleistocene-aged condor bones. So thousands and thousands of years ago, our condor's ancestors had used the very same cave that our captive-raised and reintroduced condors selected. So we were quite proud of our birds. Oh, and the picture in the top, I just wanted to show a picture of an egg in the cave. This was an egg that didn't hatch successfully and was abandoned. Dana viewed a nearby formation at Grand Canyon National Park. Wild condors first hatched successfully in California, but for several years, no chicks in California survived to leave their nest, primarily because we encountered another threat for condors in our developed world, namely trash. 4 chicks hatched in California during 2002 and 2003, and not one of them survived to leave the nest. At least 2 of these died from ingesting trash. And this is an x-ray of one of the chicks. You can see little bottle caps in its system. This was the trash that was removed from its stomach. Bottle caps, bits of glass, washers, and other trash. Condor parents initially swallowed the trash and then regurgitated it inadvertently to their young chicks when feeding them. And we don't know why they picked up this trash, except that condors explore things with their bill, and they like to pick things up and mess with them. And the glass pieces look like chips of bone. And condors often seek out calcium, or bone chips for calcium. So that might explain at least the little bits of white glass. But it is a sad statement nonetheless on the condition of our environment. And just as an aside, in the last couple of years, 2 adult condors died in Arizona after swallowing coins that may have been tossed over the cliffs by visitors to Grand Canyon. And it's sobering to realize that a kind of careless gesture that many of us have done, throw a coin somewhere and make a wish, can have serious consequences for wildlife. While those sad events were playing out in California, though, namely chicks hatching and living for a few months but not surviving to leave their nest, we were anxiously watching over our first chick here in Arizona at the Grand Canyon. It had been given the number 305. This was in 2003. And the task of watching over it was a lot easier said than done. It was a 24-mile round-trip hike into the canyon just to get to where we could observe the nest. And upon first confirming that we had a chick in Arizona, we watched over this baby condor during every daylight hour and slept in the drainage nearby at night. Condors don't leave the nest until they're about 6 months of age, as I mentioned, so we made many, many trips into the canyon to observe 305. Finally, on November 5th, 2003, while Chad and I happened to be the fortunate ones watching the nest, Condor 305 leapt from his nest and became the first wild hatch condor to fledge successfully in the wild since 1983. And this was a thrilling, exciting moment, but it was also terrifying. Condor 305 didn't exactly fly gracefully out of the nest. He jumped and dropped. He pretty much plummeted for 400 feet. And we were just jumping up and down, screaming, "He's fledging!" And then we thought, oh my God, he's plunging to his death. And he dropped down pretty hard, but landed surprisingly gently and then just didn't move. He just sat there, and we didn't move. And we said, okay? Our hearts were in our throats. And finally he reached out, and there was a yucca plant next to him, and he grabbed onto it with his bill and started tugging on it, just exploring their world like young condors do. So we were thrilled, relieved. He was just fine. Hadn't had a problem with that big fall.